The deserted parking lot of Haddington High shimmered under the large moon hazily hanging in the night sky. 18-year-old Casey, a senior on the Palm squad, had stayed late after a basketball game to organize the team's supply closet. She could still feel the electricity of the game and hear the sounds of the buzzer echoing in her ears, along with the laughter of her friends and the music of their routines. It had been a great night, and now Casey was exhausted and eager for sleep. It was a humid evening with the smell of wet earth saturating the breeze, and Casey cracked her window as she pulled out onto the main road. There hadn't been anyone else in the parking lot or any other car lights in her view, but just at the moment after she started driving, she saw a pair of headlights appear from seemingly nowhere and begin heading in the same direction. As the vehicle behind her passed under a streetlight, she could just make out the form of a red pickup truck. She figured it was someone else heading home late from the game, but couldn't ignore how strange it made her feel. She turned on some music and hummed along with it for a few minutes, hoping to see the headlights behind her turn off onto a side road, but still, the truck continued a few hundred feet behind her. She passed a speed limit sign, 45 miles per hour, and considered trying to add some distance between them. As her foot pressed the gas pedal closer to the floor, Casey's car accelerated to 55 miles per hour, and she felt a bit of relief as the glowing orbs of the pickup's headlights shrank behind her. But then, they started growing again, larger and larger, as the pickup matched and then exceeded her speed, slowly but surely diminishing the distance between them. "What the hell?" Casey muttered. As she crested a small hill, her headlights found another car a few hundred yards ahead of her. She pressed the gas pedal down further, reaching 60 miles per hour, and quickly pulled into the oncoming lane without signaling. Whipping around the car in front of her, Casey returned to her lane, satisfied with herself. It was probably nothing, she thought, but still, she felt a little better knowing that there was another car between her and that red pickup truck. But only a minute later, the car between them turned away, and Casey felt an immediate wave of discomfort as the headlights of the pickup glowed in her rearview mirror. The truck gained on her, now only a few yards back, and suddenly the driver turned their high beams on. Casey's mirrors lit up as the entire car flooded with blinding light. "What the hell?" she cried as she squinted and gripped the wheel. The high beams remained on for what felt like an eternity before finally switching off, leaving her vision dotted with spots. Confused and disoriented, Casey tried to remember if she knew anyone with a red pickup. She thought her friend Kendra may have dated some guy who drove one of those. Maybe this was just a stupid prank. Casey turned up the volume of the radio, trying to concentrate on the music, but it was pointless. She couldn't look away from those headlights in her mirror, sticking to her like fresh snow in a blizzard. Casey knew that she'd have to find a way to lose the other driver before they approached the isolated property of her family's farmhouse. "Turn, damn it," she muttered angrily to the pickup's reflection. "Please just turn off somewhere." But the haunting shadow of the truck loomed behind her with each passing mile. Casey white-knuckled the steering wheel as she neared the seldom-traveled back road that led home. The road led only to Casey's farm and a few others, and she was certain the pickup didn't belong to one of her neighbors. There was no way the pickup would have any reason to take that turn behind her. Without using her blinker, Casey careened around the turn onto the gravel road at nearly 30 miles per hour, coming dangerously close to flipping the car in hopes the truck would be forced to continue on straight down the main road. But the unrelenting shadow followed her still, slamming on its brakes and whipping violently around the bend to keep pace with Casey's car. "Fuck, no!" she screamed. Casey pressed the pedal flat to the floor, tossing gravel into the air behind her like a hailstorm as she accelerated in her little blue sedan. The trees morphed into blurry ghosts as she tore through the darkness, desperately trying to outpace the mysterious truck. Then, the high beams flashed on again, their searing light filling the cabin of Casey's car, clouding her view through the windshield. "Leave me alone!" Casey cried out, finally giving in to the panic and releasing a waterfall of tears. The high beams remained on for a minute, then turned off, but only for a second. Then they lit up again, lingering for a moment, and then went off. The pickup driver was taunting her. Casey's mind raced, and she pushed the car faster still, the engine growling beneath her as the tires struggled to grip the rocky road. But no matter how fast she went, the truck followed, its phantom driver hidden behind those blinding high beams. With a final desperate surge of speed, Emily's blue sedan veered into her driveway, sending a cloud of dust into the night sky as the tires skid. The red pickup careened in right behind her. Casey screamed as she stumbled out of her car and sprinted towards the farmhouse. The soft glow of the porch light struck out from the blue and black shadows of the surrounding country. "Dad!" Casey screamed. "Help me! Call the police!" She glanced back at the truck and was horrified to see the shape of a large man exit from the driver's side door. He was armed with something, a long and heavy crowbar. Suddenly, the front door of the farmhouse whipped open and the confused forms of Casey's mother and father appeared on the dim porch. "What the hell is going on?" her father yelled. Then he noticed the strange man in the driveway and puffed up his chest, bellowing, "Who the hell are you?" Casey dove into her mother's arms, unable to form any words as she wept and gasped for air. The stranger was screaming something and pointing at Casey's car. She watched as her father approached the man who kept shouting the same words over and over. "There's someone in the back of your car!" The stranger stepped towards Casey's vehicle, but her father commanded him to stay back. She watched as he approached the car apprehensively, finally yanking open one of the rear doors. Everything around her seemed to crumble as Casey watched her father pull a man from the back seat by his ankles. The figure wore all black and a face mask. In his hand, he clutched a large knife. The moment his body connected with the driveway, the stranger snarled and lunged from the ground. "Watch out!" Casey screamed. Her mother attempted to push her inside of the house, but she couldn't leave her father out there. She watched as he dodged the assault, but the maniac with the knife lunged forward again, his blade shimmering in the light of the moon as it snagged a slice across her father's right arm. He cried out in pain and stumbled backwards away from the attacker. At last, the pickup truck driver swung his crowbar and smashed it against the man's skull with a sickening crunch. He instantly crumpled to the ground like a discarded doll, and the truck driver dropped the tool into the dirt, taking a few steps back and placing his hands on his head. "Good God," Casey's father breathed, picking up the fallen knife. Is he dead?" Casey asked, her voice shaking. "Just passed out, I think." the truck driver replied, his eyes lingering on the prone figure. "Y'all able to call the authorities?" "They should be here any time," Casey's mother said as she returned to the porch from inside. She handed the pickup driver a glass of water and started dabbing at her husband's wound with a warm towel. After draining the glass and wiping his brow, the driver leaned against the side of Casey's car and looked up at the moon. "I couldn't believe it," he said. "I saw him slip into your car from across the lot before you left the school." He cleared his throat, trying to salvage his hoarse voice. "I knew I couldn't stop you in time, so I just followed. I don't know what the hell he planned to do," he said. "But every time I saw him start to get up from the back seat, I turned on my high beams. Made him drop back down." Casey couldn't believe how close she'd come to catastrophe. Why hadn't she locked the car during the game? How could she have failed to notice the sounds, the smells of a stranger in her space? "Thank you," she whispered with tears in her eyes. "I think you saved my life." "Don't mention it," he said. "Anyone else would do the same." But Casey knew that wasn't true. Most people would simply look the other way, pretending they didn't see anything at all. But this man had been her hero, her guardian angel in a red pickup truck, sent by the universe to guide her safely home.
The winter days were long and lonely in the Tennessee hills, but the nights were even longer. Matt lived on a remote farm in a deep valley surrounded by mountains that hunched up against the sky. One night, he sat around the fireplace with his father and Jeb Adams, a neighbor who had come to visit. His mother and Mrs. Adams were busy chatting in another room. "It's that time again," Jeb said, "when the witch cat starts to prowl." Matt turned his eyes from the fire to stare at Jeb's face and then his father's. He saw that his father had raised his eyebrows at Jeb as a signal to be quiet. "The boy should know," Jeb said, "especially with you and his mother going off to the state capitol next week. He should know about the witch cat." Just then, Matt's mother came into the room with Mrs. Adams, who measured Matt up and down with her sharp green eyes. "Time to go home," she announced. "We'll be back soon enough to pick up Matt when you take your trip to the Capitol." As soon as the Adams left, Matt followed his father outside to the stable. He had to feed the new colt his father had given him, and he also wanted to hear about the witch cat. "Your mother doesn't want you to know about this boy," his father said. "But maybe Jeb's right. The witch has been prowling around these hills for over 20 years. I say prowling because she changes shape from woman into a big, black cat. Not a natural-sized cat, mind you, but a big black cat the size of a hunting dog. People who've seen the witch say her eyes glow yellow in the night and her teeth are like fangs. The witch cat kills livestock, even horses." Matt's father stopped when he saw Matt staring down at the small colt. "We'll only be gone 2 days," he said. "Don't you let Mr. Adams get you worried." On the day his parents left, Mrs. Adams came to the house without Jeb. She told Matt that her husband was too busy with the livestock to come over and get him. They decided she would stay the night with Matt at his house instead. Matt didn't like the idea, but since his parents were already on their way, he couldn't do anything about it. He spent the day doing his chores. and that night he sat around the fire with Mrs. Adams. For a March night, it had gotten very cold with a gusty wind whipping around the sides of the house. "Hear about the witch cat?" Mrs. Adams said. "It's prowling round again." "Where?" Matt asked, hoping his voice wasn't shaking. "On the other side of Pepper Hill last night," Mrs. Adams said. "It killed a calf." Matt shivered and pulled his wool sweater tighter around his neck. He thought of his little colt alone in the stable outside. Mrs. Adams suddenly yawned and stretched her arms and legs. She told Matt she was ready to turn in for the night. But he thought she didn't look tired at all. Her eyes were bright and shiny. Still, he got ready to go to bed. She watched as he climbed the flight of wooden steps up to the loft bedroom. Then he heard her close the door to his parents' bedroom where she was going to sleep. Matt couldn't rest no matter how many sheep he counted. The wind was whining and moaning now, and the glass rattled in the window panes. Then a sound came out of the night that made his blood run cold. It was the meow of a cat, but it was so loud that Matt heard it over the moaning of the wind. The meowing kept on and on, moving around the outside of the house. Matt raised himself up on his trembling elbows and turned his head toward the small window that looked out over the barnyard. It was there in the moonlight, the shadowy shape of a huge black cat. Matt watched as it slowly raised its head toward the second story of the house where he lay. He saw its yellow eyes glowing in the moonlight. Then, as Matt watched, the witch cat turned away and began to stalk toward the stable. Matt knew what the witch cat was after. It wanted his colt. He jumped up and pulled on his clothes and boots. He scrambled down the steps and called out Mrs. Adams' name, but there was no answer. Just then, Matt heard a terrible screech from the witch cat, closer now to the colt's stable. He pulled on a jacket and reached for the big hunting knife that his father kept in the hallway. Grabbing it tightly, he pulled open the door. The March wind cut into his face as Matt rushed across the barnyard toward the stable. As he drew closer, he saw the stable door was standing wide open. He swallowed the lump of fear that had risen in his throat and crept inside. The moonlight was shining down through a window into the colt's pen, where the poor animal was cowering in a corner. In front of it was the giant witch cat, its long, sharp fangs glistening as it snarled at the colt. Just as the witch cat leapt forward, Matt lunged at it with his hunting knife. The knife sliced down on its right front paw. Blood spurted out. Matt jumped back as the witch cat screamed in pain. Then he looked down and saw the pool of blood on the stable floor. Matt watched as the witch cat limped out of the stable, hissing and snarling. When it was gone, he stooped down to pet his colt. Seeing the blood nearby, he kicked straw over it in disgust. Suddenly, Matt began to shake with cold and fear. He wanted to be back inside the house, safe and warm. He pulled shut the stable door and bolted it. Then he ran through the shadows of the barnyard into the house. He remembered as he closed the kitchen door that he had left the hunting knife in the stable. A strange sound came from near the fireplace. Matt raised his eyes to see Mrs. Adams sitting in front of the leaping flames. The sound he heard was a weird hissing coming from her mouth. Her eyes seemed to be glowing yellow in the firelight. And then Matt noticed her right hand, which was slowly dripping blood onto the farmhouse floor. Henry Archer woke with a start, feeling as though he were coming out of a long nightmare. He remembered that he had been sick for weeks, deathly sick. He remembered the doctor standing over his bed and shaking his head as though there were no hope. The faces of his nephews were there too, their glittering eyes staring down on his weak body. At the time, Henry's confused thoughts had cleared enough to realize that they wanted him to die, wanted him dead so they could inherit all of his money. Now, Henry was feeling better than he had during all those long weeks of illness. The only problem he seemed to be having was a certain shortness of breath, and the night was so dark, and his bed unusually hard. Henry shifted his body, feeling how stiff and cold it seemed. Then he raised his hands, which were crossed over his chest, to stretch them. To his surprise, he hit a hard wooden board only several inches above his body. At first, Henry thought he must still be asleep and dreaming. He knew of no place like this that he'd ever been before. His hands groped around to feel what kind of place it was. The more he examined it, the more he came to realize that he was in some sort of wooden box. The air was suddenly heavier around him than before. Henry's mind raced through the possibilities. He could think of no other reason why he might be in a wooden box than if it were a coffin. Through the panic creeping into his brain, Henry remembered that if he were in a coffin, he would be dressed in his best clothes, not the night clothes of a sick man. With a sinking heart, he passed his hand over the smooth silk tie lying on his chest, with his big diamond stick pin fastened through it. He remembered what he had written in his will, that he be buried with his diamond stick pin. Buried alive! Henry's mind sank into horror. The doctor must have thought him dead and buried him alive. Though he was not dead, he surely would be in a few more hours. Henry pushed up his knees against the coffin lid, but it didn't budge. He thought of the 6 feet of earth piled on top of him. Nothing he could do would move that weight. A scream of despair rose in Henry's throat and echoed off the walls of the coffin. He didn't know how he could endure the slow, horrible death that awaited him. And then, through the thoughts that tortured him, came a sound of something moving above him. It scratched against the dirt with sharp, steady movements. Every muscle in Henry's body tensed. What could be working through the ground of a graveyard with such persistence? Henry thought of those horrible tales about graveyard rats. People said they got bigger than cats. They dug down to freshly buried coffins, then they chewed through the wood to get to the corpse inside. Henry shook with fear as the digging sound above him came closer and closer. He felt the air in the coffin become thicker and hotter. Now he had to face the choice of 2 terrible deaths. Suddenly, there was a dull scratch against the top of his coffin lid. Henry imagined how big a rat must be to make that sound. He tried to push up against the lid, but it was fastened tight. He would have to lie there, like a helpless victim, until the rats had gnawed through the lid. There was more scratching against the lid. Then, out of the darkness above him, Henry heard a muffled voice.
"Almost got it now,"
the voice said.
"All that's left is taking off the lid,"
said a second voice. Henry's body froze in shock. It wasn't rats that were after his body. It was grave robbers. He heard a crowbar being wedged under the coffin lid. Then, with a creak, it started to raise.
"You get the diamond stick pin,"
the first voice said.
"Uncle Henry paid thousands for it. It must be worth a fortune." "No use letting it sit on a corpse,"
said the second voice. Just then, the 2 young men pulled off the lid and stared down at the corpse of their uncle. And as their greedy hands reached down to grab for his stick pin, Henry Archer rose out of his coffin and pulled them down into the grave. And he left them there, screaming with terror, as he walked back to town, brushing off the dirt that had fallen onto his diamond stick pin. During the California gold rush of 1849, 3 men were holed up in a small cabin for the night. They sat around the jumping flames of the fire and warmed themselves. Outside, the wind whistled and moaned through the canyon. Every so often, a coyote howled. The three men were old friends who had shared the hopes and disappointments of gold prospecting. This was their last night out in the hills. The next day, they planned on heading to San Francisco to find work. All of them were broke. "Damn coyotes," Billy said. "We're lucky we found this place," Jeremiah said slowly. "They're hungry tonight." Another coyote howled above the sound of the wind. This one was closer. The three men looked at each other nervously. "I still don't like moving into deserted cabins like this," the third man, named Dusty, complained. "You don't know why people left." He paused for a moment. "Nobody leaves without a reason." "Well, you can go out and sleep with the coyotes then, Dusty," Jeremiah said as he rolled out his sleeping bag. The fire was beginning to burn lower. The other two men rolled out their bags and settled down for the night. All was silent inside the cabin. Outside, the coyotes and the wind kept up their eerie symphony. Jeremiah woke from deep sleep with a start. He looked around, trying to remember where he was. The cabin, yes, the cabin, he thought drowsily. But what had woken him? He lay his head back down and shut his eyes. Then he heard it. The breathing. It was fast, excited breathing, coming in short gasps. He looked over to the fireplace where Billy was sprawled out, asleep. Jeremiah's blood froze at what he saw. A face, nothing but the hideous face of an old woman, was hovering over Billy's body. The short gasps of breathing were coming from the hag's face. Jeremiah could see the lips opening and closing with the breathing. "Billy!" he screamed. Billy shuddered in his sleep. Then he raised himself to his elbows and slowly opened his eyes. His face was only 2 inches from the face of the old hag. Jeremiah watched as his eyes widened in horror as he looked at it. The hag's face was old and wrinkled. The skin was blistered by the sun and disease. Hair stood out on her head like twisting snakes, and her eyes were full of hatred. Jeremiah could hear its panting breath come faster. Billy parted his lips in a scream. Then the hag breathed a long, deep breath into his lungs. As Billy's body slumped backwards, the face disappeared. "My God," Jeremiah said softly. He didn't believe in ghosts, and his mind couldn't make any sense of what he had just seen. But that didn't make any difference now. He kicked Dusty with his foot to wake him up. Then he ran over to check Billy, but Billy was dead. "We gotta get out of here, Dusty," Jeremiah said. "Billy's dead. There was a face, an old hag's face. I don't know, it was a ghost or something." Dusty was lying on his sleeping bag, eyeing Jeremiah suspiciously. "You cracking up, Jeremiah?" he asked. But Dusty didn't say any more, because he found out what Jeremiah meant. The face materialized out of the air in front of him. Once again, the cabin filled with the sound of the old hag's breathing. Dusty's face worked itself into an expression of horror. "Keep your mouth shut, Dusty," Jeremiah screamed in warning, but it was too late. Dusty's mouth opened wide in a scream. The hag's face breathed death into his body through its withered lips. Then it disappeared. Jeremiah backed against the cabin wall. He looked down at his 2 dead friends. A coyote pierced the silence with its hungry howl. Jeremiah ran for the door, A foot away from escape, the hag's face appeared before him. Jeremiah's legs stiffened with fright. His hand froze on the door latch. The old woman's eyes were looking into his. He could see the pattern of wrinkles and scars on her face. He could feel her panting breath and felt himself choking. His breath seemed stuck in his lungs. The face was coming nearer and nearer. He struggled to keep his mouth shut. He thought of Billy and Dusty. He jerked aside the door latch and threw the cabin door open, watching as the door swung right through the hag's face. She disappeared once again. Jeremiah grabbed the rifle by the door and ran down into the canyon. He ran until he felt his lungs would burst. His own hard breathing sounds haunted him. It sounded like the breathing of the old hag following him. He kept running until the night broke into daylight. Finally, he threw himself down, exhausted, on a flat rock. For the first time since his escape from the cabin, he began to gather his distracted thoughts. Billy and Dusty were dead. Something had killed them. Jeremiah could still see the hag's hideous face in his mind. What was she? He wondered. The mad ghost of a prospector's wife seeking revenge? An evil spirit left by the indigenous people who had been forced out of these mountains by the gold rush? Or was that the face that death wore? And now that she had shown herself to him, was there any escape? Suddenly, Jeremiah realized how horrible his situation was. Someone was sure to find Billy's and Dusty's dead bodies, and nobody would believe his story about the hag's face. People would say he killed his partners for gold, and there would be no way for him to explain it. For a moment, Jeremiah thought he might go crazy. Then, he realized there was only one way out. He had to get out of the mountains fast before someone found the bodies. Far in the distance, he saw the dusty trail of a stagecoach. It was coming his way up the mountain. There was the answer, he decided. He would ride the stagecoach out of the territory. Jumping to his feet, Jeremiah ran down the canyon to the stagecoach road below. He had little time to catch his breath before he flagged down the driver. "Climb in, there's plenty of room," the driver shouted at him. As Jeremiah climbed into the coach, he saw that there was only one other passenger, a woman. He settled back into his seat and looked across at her. She was young and beautiful. He smiled to himself as he thought of his luck. Not only had he escaped the horrible death-breathing hag, but now he was sitting across from this charming girl. The young woman saw him looking at her, and she smiled shyly back at Jeremiah. As the stagecoach rocked slowly from side to side, Jeremiah's tense body began to relax. Everything will work out all right, he thought to himself, and he drifted off to a contented sleep. He woke suddenly with a start. His heart was pounding wildly. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The stagecoach. Yes, the stagecoach, he thought drowsily. But what had awakened him? Then he heard it. The breathing. It was fast, excited breathing, coming in short gasps. Jeremiah looked up. The young woman was staring at him. He saw her lovely lips opening and closing with the breathing. Jeremiah's eyes took on a wild look. He thought of Billy and Dusty. The breathing seemed to get louder. It seemed to pound in his ears. He crouched into the corner of the stagecoach. Desperately, he looked out the window. The coach was going around a hairpin curve next to a cliff that fell sharply to the deep canyon below. He looked at the woman again. She was still staring at him. Her breath was coming louder still. The whole stagecoach seemed to fill with it. "No," Jeremiah moaned softly. "Is there something wrong?" the young woman asked as she got up from her seat and sat beside Jeremiah. He shrank back against the stagecoach door. He watched as the woman's face came closer to him. She was lifting her hand to his forehead. He could feel her breathing against his face. "No!" Jeremiah screamed as he turned the latch on the door and jumped out of the stagecoach. His scream echoed up from the canyon as his body tumbled down the steep cliff. Then, the young woman heard no more. She sat sobbing in the stagecoach, terrified with fright. It was her first trip out west, and she just watched as a man that she'd never met before leapt to his death. It was the night guard's first night of duty in the Egyptian rooms of the museum. He had been assigned to work in the Viking room for many months before this. He plopped his large body down on a hard bench by the wall. His bloodshot eyes surveyed the room. There were huge stone sculptures of lions with the heads of men, and wall paintings filled with strange symbols. There were jars, clothing, utensils, and, what interested him the most, mummies and coffins. "I should have myself a good time in here," he muttered to himself, and then he let out a cackling laugh. The guard had a good time in the Viking section of the museum as well. That was the reason for his transfer to the Egyptian wing. No one had been able to prove he had done it, of course, but he knew he was suspected. It was worth it, though. He had enjoyed scratching that word into the old Viking stone and putting that cigarette butt into the mouth of the fake Viking warrior. There were other things he had done too, things that they hadn't even caught yet. He hated museums, always had, ever since his mother had dragged him through them as a child, and he didn't like being a night guard in this museum. But what else could he do? It was the only job he could find. Anyway, at least he could make sure that he wouldn't get bored. The guard heaved his heavy body off the bench and began making a slow circuit around the long room. After a few steps, he stopped in front of a huge wall painting. It was filled with weird symbols and pictures of people with animal heads. A woman with the head of a bird, a man with the head of a cow, another man with the head of a fox. There was also a bird with the head of a man, and a monstrous thing with the head of an alligator. "Rubbish," the guard muttered. But he stooped to see the title of the picture on the wall plaque. "The Seal of Judgment," it read. Underneath the title were these words: "The Egyptians thought that when a man died, his soul went before judges, all seated in a great hall. The judges wanted a report on the way he had behaved while on earth. Then the man's heart was weighed on a scale against a feather, the symbol of truth and justice. This was to find out if the man had spoken the truth to the judges. If he had lied, he was immediately fed to the monster with a crocodile head." The guard finished reading the plaque on the wall. Then he looked at the picture again. The scale was there, a heart on one side and a feather on the other. And the monster with the crocodile head was waiting beside the scale. The guard took a few steps backwards from the wall painting, but he didn't take his eyes off the crocodile. It fascinated him. "Does it scare you?" The voice made every muscle in the guard's body jump. He swung his large body around to face the speaker. It was the assistant curator of the museum, smiling. "I didn't mean to scare you," the curator said in a slow, measured voice. "I wanted to know if the painting scared you." The guard was embarrassed now. His embarrassment quickly turned to anger. "That old junk doesn't scare me," he said. "What do you mean sneaking up on me like that?" The guard glared down at the short curator. "I didn't sneak up on you," the curator answered in slow speech. "On the contrary, I walked quite normally. It's your job to be alert, after all." The guard didn't reply. He was seething with anger. "And furthermore," the curator went on, "this isn't junk. Our museum has one of the best collections of Egyptian artifacts in the world." "Doesn't interest me," the guard said, walking away from the curator. "I think it's junk." The curator's face went red. "We're on to your tricks, you know. If we weren't so short-staffed, I'd have you fired." The guard turned around and stared at the curator with an insolent look on his face. "You just watch yourself," the curator kept it up. "If you disturb anything in this room, you could be sorry." The Egyptians knew a lot about magic and curses and had great respect for their dead. You had better not try any of your tricks in here. The little curator continued his lecture until he walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The guard began his circuit of the room again. Now he had a surly scowl on his face. As he passed the Egyptian paintings and statues, he began to hate them more and more. The humans with animal heads seemed to threaten him with their beaks and claws and strange, passive faces. "You better watch yourself," the guard mimicked the curator's words. "They can have this job," he muttered. The guard stopped to pull out a stick of chewing gum from his pocket. In front of him was a wooden coffin. The sign beside it indicated that it belonged to a princess. It was in the shape of a human body. The coffin bottom lay flat on the floor. The decorated coffin lid stood upright at the foot of the bottom. As he began to chew his gum, the guard stared at the pictures on the decorated lid. The body of the lid was covered with feathers, human figures, snakes, and strange symbols. On top of the lid, there was a face, the face of an Egyptian woman. She had large, almond-shaped black eyes. The guard found himself staring into them. "Ow!" The guard had bitten his tongue while chewing his gum. The pain snapped him back to reality. For a moment, he had become lost in that woman's eyes. He put his fingers in his mouth and took out the gum. He looked around for a place to put it. Opposite the coffin was a mummy. It was the son of the princess. The guard looked at the mummy's human shape, wrapped in yellowing strips of cloth. He laughed under his breath. Then he stuck his piece of gum onto the back of the mummy's head. Now he laughed louder. But suddenly he stopped. He felt as though someone was behind him, watching. He whirled around, but no one was there. Only the coffin. The woman's eyes were staring at him just as before. The guard started to walk away from the coffin, but he found he couldn't take his eyes away from the woman's face. They seemed to be paralyzing his body. The first sickly feeling of fear crept into the guard's mind. He remembered the curator's words. They had magic and curses and respected their dead. Then he remembered that the mummy was this woman's son. The guard struggled to leave the spot where he stood. He swore at the coffin lid. He tried to reach out and knock it over, but he couldn't help himself. He seemed to be sinking deeper and deeper into the black eyes of the woman. Those eyes seemed to beckon him, to hypnotize him. They were like bottomless black pits set into the white, passive face of death. The guard found himself being drawn forward, toward the coffin. His brain was slowing down, becoming sleepy. As he came within inches of the woman's eyes, suddenly they closed. Instantly, his own eyes went toward the coffin bottom. He saw that it was bigger than it first seemed, big enough for him to lie down in. The guard was falling asleep. He let his body slip down into the soft, cushioned bottom of the coffin. He stretched himself out. With his hands by his side, his body fit perfectly. Just before he fell asleep, the guard opened his eyes once more. He looked up at the inside of the coffin lid, which faced him at the bottom of his feet. He saw the woman's face was painted on the inside of the lid, too. Her eyes were watching him, but these eyes were blacker yet. Black with revenge. The guard slipped off into strange dreams, just as the coffin lid fell neatly down over the coffin bottom. He lay in darkness. Then, the airtight, eternal darkness of an Egyptian coffin. And somewhere, the monster with a crocodile's head was waiting for him. Terry woke up and looked at the clock. "Oh no," he groaned. "Time to get up already." Then he remembered. There was no school today. He could lay back on his pillow and tried to figure out how he should feel about classes being canceled. There were no classes because of Mrs. Stowe's funeral. She had been the 5th grade teacher, Terry's teacher. And a couple of days ago, she had been found dead in her home. Murdered. Terry stared at the ceiling. His ex-teacher had always seemed to pick on him, and they had developed a mutual dislike for each other over the year. In fact, the day before she died, the same day he found Midnight, he had been so mad at her that he wished something would happen to her. She had embarrassed him in front of the whole class. When she found out he hadn't done the homework assignment, she made him come up to the blackboard while she instructed him to write the assignment, as if he were a 2nd grader. He was so mad he had wanted to scream. When he heard something had happened to her, he felt guilty. He had never wished she would get murdered, that was for sure. A flying object landed on Terry's stomach. "Hey," he yelled. "Midnight, you stupid cat." Midnight looked up at Terry from her landing pad and began to purr. She had found Terry nearly a week ago. He had been walking home from school when out of nowhere Midnight appeared. She ran right up to him and started rubbing against his leg. He examined her and she looked pretty healthy, but there was no identifying collar. He played with her for a bit, and when he came home, she followed. He named her Midnight because her fur was the deepest, darkest black he had ever seen. His mother came into the room. "Don't forget we're going to Mrs. Stowe's funeral today, Terry." "Come on, Mom, how could I forget that?" His mother smiled. "You'd find a way. Now hurry up, Scott'll be here soon." Most of the 5th grade class was at the funeral. Terry made sure to stand with Scott, who was his best friend. "This is pretty weird," Scott whispered halfway through the ceremony. "I mean, who would have thought to kill Mrs. Stowe?" Terry nodded. "I know," he whispered back. "It's not like she was my favorite teacher or anything, but geez." Scott continued. "I heard she was hacked up into little pieces." "Who told you that?" Terry demanded. "Shh!" Terry's mother hushed him before he got the answer, and he turned forward. The minister gave a long speech about Mrs. Stowe's dedication to her students. He was followed by Mr. Keller, the school principal. Terry tried not to fidget, but he really wanted to know more about what Scott had said. After the funeral, the kids piled back into their parents' cars. Terry talked his mom into letting him and Scott walk back to the house together. "What did you mean when you said she got all hacked up?" Terry asked as soon as his mother was out of earshot. Ryan heard his dad talking about it. He said she was torn apart. It was possible, Terry thought. After all, Ryan's dad was a policeman. Do they have any idea who did it? Ryan says they don't have a clue. They reached Terry's house and spent the rest of the morning reading comic books. Scott had to go home at lunchtime to watch his little brother. Terry flipped on the television and sat on the couch. Soon, midnight came into the room and curled up against his leg. He wondered about Mrs. Stowe. How strong would a person have to be to actually tear a human body apart? He shivered. No matter how stupid she made him feel, he would never have wished that on her. No, that kind of punishment had to be reserved for people who really deserved it. Like Howard, the school bully. Terry grunted. All the kids hated Howard. He was the biggest kid in 6th grade and he beat up on everybody. Once he had sent Terry home with a cut lip, and Terry had been too frightened to tell his parents what had really happened. He told them he had fallen on the playground. Yeah, he thought with a nod of his head. Howard was a person who deserved to be torn to shreds. The next day was school as usual, but when Terry got there, the playground was buzzing with excitement. Scott ran over to him as soon as he saw him. "You're not going to believe this," Scott practically yelled. He had a wild look and his voice sounded shaky. "What?" "You know they think Mrs. Stowe was murdered?" Terry nodded. "Well, guess who the latest victim was?" Scott waited for effect, then practically shrieked. "Howard!" Terry felt a chill creep over his skin, as if some unseen hand were plucking at his arm hairs. "Howard?" he asked in a low voice. "Are you serious?" Scott nodded like his head would fall off. I know, I didn't believe it either. But he didn't show up for class this morning, and then Mr. Keller came by and made the announcement that Howard had been found dead." "Did he say how?" asked Terry in a daze. Scott frowned. Of course not. But by the end of school, word had filtered through the playground grapevine that Howard's throat had been slashed. Terry listened to each new detail with increasing panic. He had trouble concentrating during class and was almost surprised when the bell rang at the end of the day. Terry caught a ride home with Scott's mother, and when he got there, he practically ran inside. He slammed the door behind him and dove onto the couch. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. He buried his head in his hands and tried to convince himself that he had nothing to do with Howard's or Mrs. Stowe's deaths. His mind was racing. He couldn't help thinking about a television movie he saw once, about a man who had trouble with his memory, and at the end of the movie, the man found out that during his blackouts he had been killing people. Is that what's happening to me? Terry wondered out loud. No, that was impossible. How could he have gotten to Mrs. Stowe's house? She lived on the other side of the town. And how could he have done what Ryan's father had said was done to her body? And as for Howard, sure, he had just been thinking that it was Howard's turn for some punishment, but there was no way he could have done anything about it. It had to be coincidence, Terry finally convinced himself. He felt a little better after that and went to his room to do his homework. The rest of the month passed uneventfully. Terry's mother left town to help with her sister, who was in the hospital. Terry slowly forgot about his suspicions that he was a deranged killer who unconsciously murdered everybody he didn't like. Instead, he started to think about Diane's birthday party at the end of the month. The entire 5th grade class was going, and it was shaping up to be the event of the semester. The Friday before the party, everyone was making plans to meet the next day. Terry got home and did his homework so he wouldn't have to worry about it over the weekend. Then, because his dad still hadn't come home, He made himself a sandwich to snack on. Midnight came strolling in, and Terry chased her around the kitchen. Then she darted into the living room and began racing around with Terry in hot pursuit. Suddenly, she tore down the hall, and when Terry jumped after her, he crashed against the corner of his dad's display case. He yelled and stumbled to the floor. Then his blood chilled as he heard the sounds of breaking glass. He slowly turned to look. The display case stood on 4 thin legs with 2 glass doors. Inside was his father's collection of old camera equipment. Now the case lay toppled over, and Terry knew with a sick feeling what he would find when he stood up. Sure enough, the glass doors had broken when the ancient projector had fallen against them. What Terry didn't know was whether or not he had ruined the cameras and projector as well. He cleaned up the mess as best he could and waited in agony until his father came home. His father noticed the damage the minute he walked in. "What happened here?" he asked in a disturbingly quiet voice. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was chasing Midnight and I tripped and fell against the case. It was an accident." His father didn't say anything right away, but walked over to inspect his collection. Then he turned to Terry. "You know better than that." Terry hung his head. That was the worst part. He did know he wasn't supposed to run around the living room. "Yes," he admitted. His father nodded and studied the shattered glass doors. "Well, I'm going to have to go and get some glass cut tomorrow. Then I'll see if I can rehang these doors. And I think while I'm out, that would be a perfect time for you to sit quietly and think about why I make rules about what you should and should not be doing in the house." With dawning horror, Terry realized what his father was saying. "You mean I'm grounded?" he asked in a panic. "That's exactly what I mean." "But Dad, you can't, not tomorrow. Diane's party is tomorrow. Everyone will be there." "Not everybody." His father turned to look at him. "Because you'll be here. No arguments." Terry opened and closed his mouth silently. He could feel hot tears beginning to burn his eyes. He knew it was useless to argue, so he ran to his room and threw himself on the bed. It wasn't fair. He didn't mean to knock the stupid case down. His tears filled his eyes and ran down his cheeks. Everyone was going to the party. Why did his dad have to be so mean? Midnight came in and jumped on the bed next to him. Terry angrily shoved her away. "Get out of here, you stupid cat," he cried. "It's all your fault." Later at dinner, he tried to persuade his father to change his mind. He offered to stay home Sunday instead, or all weekend next week. But his father wouldn't budge. Terry went back to bed in a black mood and fell asleep, planning to run away. That would teach his father to not be so hateful. In the middle of the night, he heard a sound. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. Then he switched on the light at the side of the bed. Midnight had pushed the door open slightly and was backing into the room. Terry watched curiously, trying to figure out what the cat was doing. Some trick of the light made Midnight seem much bigger than usual. Then Terry realized she was dragging something with her mouth. As the cat backed further into the room, Terry saw the prize she carried. A scream ripped from his throat as he saw a bloody head. It was his father. Midnight dragged it all the way into the room and turned to look at Terry proudly. Terry kept screaming until he realized that his mother was not coming either. Then he picked up the bedside lamp and hurled it at the cat. Midnight was taken by surprise, but the lamp was pulled short at the last second by the power cord, which was wrapped around one leg of the bed. The cat jumped back and hissed at Terry. "Get away from me!" Terry screamed. He jumped out of bed and grabbed his baseball bat from behind the door and swung it at the animal. Midnight jumped aside and Terry missed. He was panting with fear and almost blinded by tears, but he was still able to see the change coming over the cat. She was growing bigger. She prowled back and forth, and her tail cut through the air like a whip. And with each turn she took, her body swelled larger. Terry threw the bat at the creature and squeezed out the door, slamming it shut. He stepped in something sticky and flipped on the hall light. He was standing in the trail of blood that led from his parents' room to his bedroom door. As his mind tried to accept this information, a crashing blow shook the door in its frame. Terry jumped back and watched in terrified fascination as blow after blow hit the door. Then, with a noise like a saw blade cutting through wood, a huge black paw tore through the door. Terry backed slowly away, his mind no longer functioning. He watched the big black cat try to push its way through the hole. It now stood nearly as tall as Terry at its shoulders. Terry turned to run. There was a roar from behind him and the door splintered apart. He ducked into the bathroom and slammed the door behind him. A second later, the monster hit it from the other side. Terry clawed frantically at the bathroom window while the black cat battered at the door. Then, with a final thought that snapped his mind, he remembered that the window was barred on the outside. Numbly, he turned to face the bathroom door, just as the cat began to shoulder its way through.